Everyone, welcome to today's collaborative mentoring webinar series. I'm going to give folks a minute or so just to come in and get settled, but thank you so much for joining us today on the topic of social and emotional learning, exploring models and strategies. So let me just wait for a few more folks to come in and then we'll get started. Okay, thank you so much for joining. Welcome everyone again to today's webinar. Before we get started, I wanted to share some housekeeping information. All attendees have been muted for the best sound. However, we want this to be a participatory experience. So please use the Q&A box to ask any questions at the bottom of your screen. And as well, you can use the chat box to kind of introduce yourself, say hi, and also feel free to put any comments in the chat box as well. There are also live captions available in the panel by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of the screen. I will also be queuing up questions to share with the panelists during the Q&A portion. So we may not get to all the questions since there are several hundred of you here today, but we'll do our best. The questions that we typically share with our panelists are generally ones that broaden or deepen the conversation. But if you're not able to get to your question today, please feel free to reach out to us at Mentor or our panelists who have provided their contact information later. And just to get an idea of who is in the audience with us today, we have two polls. So the first one is what best describes your role in the mentoring field? So are you a mentoring program staff or practitioner, a mentor, educator, technical assistance provider, researcher, funder, or other? And if you're other, please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself and your role in the mentoring field. So we welcome you all here today. Give you all a couple more seconds. Okay, show results. So it looks like we have majority of folks here, 73% are mentoring program staff or practitioners. We have some mentors, some educators, and also a couple of you all are TA providers, researchers, and others. So welcome again. And now we have another poll and talk about your experience level in the mentoring field. So beginner, experienced, expert. So you've been in the field for just a couple of years, 4 to 5, 10 or more. Feel free to answer that. Again, thank you all for being here. I'm going to close the poll now. We'll see, got beginner 35%, experienced 56%, and 10% of you all are experts. Great. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded today. In about 1 week, all attendees will receive an email with information about how to download a copy of the slides and view the webinar recording. So you can access that on Mentor's webpage or the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series website. And to continually improve the series, we're looking for your input, so please help us out by answering the short survey as you exit the webinar today. So now to jump into the content for the day, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Shirk, who will be facilitating our webinar and talking more about social emotional learning.
Great, thank you, Manny, and welcome everybody to our webinar on social and emotional learning. I believe we have an exciting training for you with two really good panelists. And as you can see, there are the topics. We're going to cover a little bit about the history and the background of the development of social emotional learning, strategies for working with mentees in both one-to-one programs and also in group mentoring, exploring online SEL resources, which there are an abundance out there. Then William Figueroa, one of our panelists, is going to talk about LA Teen Mentoring's use of social emotional learning and how they develop their curriculum using SEL and how they train their mentors. So next, please. So Dr. Lori Ballant is with us today, and she has a tremendous background in SEL. She's an education leader expert. She has been a teacher and district administrator for LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District. She's considered a national expert on this topic, and she's developed programs impressively in over 900 schools. She's worked on local and national policy and has even participated in congressional briefings. And William Figueroa is a friend of mine, and we have actually presented several times together. He's a ball of fire when it comes to mentoring. He's director of programs at LA Team Mentoring. He's been there for 20 years. He's co-chair of LAMP, the Los Angeles Mentoring Partnership. And he has walked in the shoes of at-risk children being born in Miami in a tough area. Their program, Los Angeles Team Mentoring, recently pivoted to virtual mentoring. So he's going to tell you all about the pivot and all about their plans for the future. Will they stay virtually, or will they be in person, or will they be a hybrid? Okay. Myself, I'm Jerry Shirk. I'm former school counselor. I developed and ran and facilitated group mentoring in several San Diego city schools for 5 or 6 years. I've been a mentoring consultant and a trainer for about 25 years. I currently work with the California Mentoring Partnership and the National Mentoring Resource Center, helping programs. And I learned mentoring and leadership as a 12-year player of defensive tackle for the Cleveland Browns. So I sometimes say, and I'll say today, I used to tear people apart, but now I put them back together in mentoring relationships. I've gone full circle, hopefully. Okay, next, please. Just want to start out by saying mentoring is social emotional learning. I think if we use the concepts and philosophies of mentoring and what the research says and what common sense tells us, we take our young people a long way in their social and emotional learning development. There was actually a webinar at the National Mentoring Summit, I believe, with this name, Mentoring is Social and Emotional Learning. And these are the 5 areas that are generally thought of in as far as topics in social and emotional learning. And just want to say, and I believe the presenters will agree, that social emotional learning is best accomplished by walking through the door of relationship. And then also, I just wanted to mention before we dig in a little further, that I know that everybody in this call is a helper. One of my joys is working with people that are helping others, helping young people. And because of that, we know that you have a heart, and you're in this because you're on your own journey. We just want to encourage you today, in part because the area of social emotional learning is so vast, just to deepen your journey, to work on yourself as you're learning this. And as you learn, you're going to become a better person, and you're going to be able to teach. And I always think about teaching. When you teach others, whether it's staff, whether it's mentors, whether it's mentees, you accelerate your own learning and your own journey. So next, please. Social and emotional learning has been around a long time. I've actually dug into this topic about 4 months ago when we decided to do a webinar on this, and found that it's everywhere. You know, it's way more than mythology, philosophy, religion, psychology, self-help. It's culture, it's family stories, it's just, you know, all the teachings that we get, the right way to do things, or the best way to do things. But the terminology and packaging is relatively new. And again, social and emotional learning, and, you know, at first I thought, well, it's everything except academics. But one of the major companies that actually teaches social emotional learning, their name is the collaboration for academics and social and emotional learning. So they throw academics into it also. So it's everything under the sun. Next, please. Where did SEL originate? I was actually listening to a couple podcasts with this fellow, Daniel Goleman, and he came up with the term. Actually, it was a Yale professor. He saw this in an article that a professor had written, emotional intelligence, and he caught on fire about it. And I think just remembering some of the major concepts, and this is sort of the business world where it came from, is that what he found, and common sense tells us, is that emotional intelligence can matter more than IQ when it comes to leading a successful life. People want to work with people that they like. And if you have emotional intelligence, so this leads to success. And he also says the first step to emotional intelligence is to recognize your own emotions. And I know Lori is going to talk about that some. Next, please. And this is the CASTLE model. So Goleman co-founded CASTLE, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. These are the 5 categories that they use, and a lot of people focus on these areas, whether they use the CASTLE curriculum directly or not. These are good areas to focus on. And SEL in the mentoring world, it's to me, and then talking to others in the field, it's a natural for group mentoring because the young people really like the interaction, the power of the milieu, and talking about issues with each other and helping each other solve problems. It can be used in one-to-one matches, I think, with some cautions. It can feel prescriptive and directive, and we were talking the other day, Lori and I and William, and you don't want a mentor to show up with a piece of paper for every session one-to-one. That can be really prescriptive and directive and really intimidate young people. And again, always, we can't say this enough, always walk through the door of relationship. And then mentors that don't have very much training, typically in programs for the initial mentor training is maybe 2 to 4 hours. So you shouldn't be expecting mentors to be therapists. So there's a caution there. And then, as I said, the resources, the curriculum, the models for SEL are abundant. And I'm going to turn it over to Lori, who's going to talk about, speak about 20 minutes or so, and then William will go for 20 minutes, and then we'll have questions and answers. So take it away, Lori.
Thanks, Jerry. Really happy to be here with you. When I pulled up this story, it takes on, you can look at it through the lens of many different ways with this story. You can look at it through culture, you can look at it through gaining wisdom, you can look at it in lots of different ways, but I wanted to use it to kind of frame us in the realm of the lens of social emotional learning. And you can read what it says about here, what it says. And I think that in our daily lives, just reflect on the folks that you know that feed the anger or feed love and forgiveness and peace. These are things that are learned. These are things that are modeled. These are things that we can pay attention to. And in the mentoring relationship, we want to move kids away from always reacting with anger into a space where they can respond. That is in a much more calm place, and give them the skills that they need in order to have a healthy and fulfilling life. Doesn't mean they won't get angry, doesn't mean that they won't, have regular emotions. It means that we need to be the model for them of moving towards a life full of love, forgiveness, and peace. But then also at the same time, that's not enough. We have to teach them and help them and show them how to deal with their own anger and their own emotions that can actually sabotage them. So it's recognizing it early when your emotions are sabotaging you, and how to move it towards a positive place of growth and wisdom. Because there is definitely a place for struggle. Struggle is important, but framing the struggle for our students is really, really important. Okay, next one. This is for everybody. This is me as a parent of 6 and a grandparent of 8. It's not what I say, it's what I do. They're really constantly watching you. And as a teacher, I learned this really quickly. And as a parent, because when you see your kids start doing what you do, you go, uh-oh, I better be careful about what I'm presenting to the world. So the thing about as mentors and people that run mentoring programs and researchers, it's be the model that these kids can look at for guidance. Even your facial expressions, even your body language, you're giving them clues and cues about what it means to be a healthy adult. And so monitoring your own behavior and monitoring your own reactions to things is really important. The research says now what we knew all along, that social emotional learning is really important. But now we have a lot of meta-analysis. We have a lot of research that shows us the importance of social emotional learning in our daily relationships, in our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to school and the world of work. Castle added academic in there because your emotional state has a lot to do with your ability to form academically, to be curious, to be resilient, to go back at a task when it's challenging for you. The other important work that's really coming to light right now is the trauma-informed work and some of the work around epigenetics, the way the brain has developed even over generations and in populations that have been stressed, especially in the African American community, but it exists in all communities that are stressed over time. So maybe in the Appalachia or places like that where people have experienced poverty and stress. So trauma-informed is really important to understand that when a student may not be responding to you, their brain may actually be shutting into or going to a place where they can't hear you. Literally, there are physiological responses to trauma that may look like defiance. So I think it's important to understand that trauma definitely affects kids' abilities to even listen. The other issue around social emotional learning, especially in the middle school, is equity and identity development. They're trying to figure out who they are. I saw this with my own son when he was in middle school. He's a big guy, sweet kid. He came home very upset one day. And I said, Blake, what's going on? He goes, Mom, I just don't know how to be an asshole. And I thought, what is that about? But for him, because he was big and he was strong, he was supposed to be like a big bully in his brain. That's sort of where he went. It's like, I'm big and I'm strong. And so I should be using my strength externally and internally to show how strong, but that's not who he was. He's a sensitive kid. So we of course had to have a discussion around that, but they are definitely identifying, figuring out who they want to be, how they want to be, looking at models around them. That's why your influence on them is so important. It's so important. The people closest to them are the models that they most pay attention to. And then the restorative practices. When I first started hearing about restorative justice, I had a real negative response to it, only because of the context of which I heard about it in, which was prisons were using restorative justice. And so to me, it was like, I didn't understand it. Now I understand it a lot better, that when you are developing healthy human beings, you need to have a community that restores you when you need it. It's more about listening, helping, understanding, and even in the restorative community, our students are able to actually give and gain wisdom to others and support to others. So restorative practices are really important to pay attention to. Okay, next. All right, I am going to say this more than one time, probably many, many times. And I say it to myself, by the way. This is not a journey that I am not on as well. The most important thing is to model the behavior. So understanding yourself and how you react, understanding your own emotional intelligence, or how you work in the world. How do you handle stress? How do you handle difficult conversations? How do you and yourself, what are your calming down techniques? Because if you're modeling these things for kids and they're paying attention, then you want to model the best behavior that you have. So it's not about you, but it starts with you. Again, it's about their agenda and not yours. Really, really listening to what they have to tell you and not judging. That's the other thing I can't just stress more. You cannot judge. You can be concerned. You can, obviously be supportive, but kids they're so afraid of being judged. And if they feel like they're being judged, they're going to shut down. So you have to listen with an open heart and with relentless compassion, because you have not walked in their shoes. And I'm sure you all know that, but it's just as a reminder to me, as well as everybody else, relentless compassion. Because these kids, a lot of them have faced controversy and challenges that adults have never, especially women like me, middle-aged white women, we have not faced what these kids have faced. And so we can't use our judgment our values and how we grew up. Okay, this is the way it should be. It's not how it should be. How is it, and how can we help them? Empathy is the cornerstone of SEL, and it's also the cornerstone, by the way, of violence prevention, which I have a background in. But really developing empathy and giving them examples of empathy and giving them opportunities to experience empathy and talking to them about empathy is really, really important. It's that human connectedness that mentoring is so perfect for, is developing the empathy. Consistent language. Make sure that you understand what they're talking about when they're telling you something. You may think they're telling you something, but you got to make sure that you're real clear about the language that's being used. And also, if you're in a program, like William has a whole program and staff, make sure that you're clear with your staff about what you're talking about. When you use a term, make sure everybody's clear, because let me tell you, in education, we call all kinds of stuff. So really being consistent with your language, with your staff, and with the people you're working with. So when you say something, they get it. You know, it's like a shorthand that everybody understands what this means. So checking for understanding. Active listening obviously is so important. Much more listening than talking. Again, staying calm when they tell you things, and really helping them process what's going on is really important. This one to me is key: storytelling. Storytelling takes away the moral that I'm trying to give you to a place where you're telling a story and it sort of comes up in the conversation. You can lead the questions around storytelling, but storytelling is so important because it's not like a teacher relationship with a student. I mean, it's not judgmental. It's not, you know, the story should tell itself, and then the lessons come out of it, and then you have the discussion around it. But I highly recommend storytelling. And then what we really want for our students and for the kids we're mentoring, I should say, is the locus of control of self-regulating behavior. I'm not telling them calm down, which by the way does not work. They are learning how to recognize in their body what's going on. How is my breathing? What's my heart rate like? How do I control my breathing so I can regulate my behavior? This is really important. I mean, we do it toddlers, middle school, and even seniors. You know, we have to learn how to regulate our behavior so we stay calm. In that first example of the storytelling of the grandfather with the grandson, is really about how do I respond to what's happening around me? What do I feed? So when you learn to calm yourself down, then you can feed the part of you that's going to make a better decision. Okay, next one. This to me is so important. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put it up here. So I just want to reiterate. You can talk to kids about their emotions, and it's really, really important to start identifying emotions at a very early age. So at a very early age, even with toddlers and preschoolers, you know, they need to start learning the language of emotion. Because I got to tell you, in high school, when I taught and asked kids what they were feeling, they could not give me a sophisticated word for the word that they were, the way they were feeling. I'd say, how do you feel? They say, I feel bad. I said, well, what does that mean? They just didn't have the language of emotion. And this is so critical. So even starting in preschool, you can do these wheels of emotion, and they can either point to it or like checking in. I think William's going to talk a little bit about this as well. Check-ins, how do you feel today? And then you can ask them questions about, well, what happened? You know, you don't say what's wrong, you say what happened. That's a really critical thing when we're dealing with a kid who's kind of in a state. Instead of saying what's wrong, you say what happened, and they can tell you the story of what happened, not just what's wrong. So, but the second one here, where the emotion slide, where it gets more sophisticated, I highly, highly, highly recommend that when you go into the middle, if a kid gives you emotion in the middle, that you help them define what maybe another emotion, another word for an emotion that's on the outer concentric of the circle, to get more and more sophisticated about the language that they use around emotion. I can't stress how important this is, because if you can't identify your emotion, then how can you deal with it? If you have an emotion and you need a strategy to help you with that emotion, you need to be able to identify it. And so this goes back to the original story that I showed in the beginning, is identifying the emotion and then figuring out how to calm yourself down, and then how to make sure that you're in the right space to feed the right outcome for yourself, or to gain the wisdom of that experience. That's the other thing that I think is really important for students, is to, or kids, all of us, to learn the wisdom of the experience, bad or good, right? Okay, and I think I have, I'm looking at my time, by the way. Okay, and then the next one. Strategies. These are really cool strategies. I think it's really, really important. Obviously, again, I put it in the slide. This is like, 20 years of my just boiling it down to the basics of what I think is so important, is having our kids do good deeds. They have the ability to affect change in the world. It gives them agency. It gives them efficacy. There's nothing like doing. They need to do, not just to hear and talk, but they need to do. So really, really important to give them the opportunity to do good things, to do good deeds. Now they can decide what that is, or you can decide together, or you can take them to an opportunity, maybe something that's important to them to do. It could be something as simple as weeding the garden, or it could be something like a community cleanup, or it could be reading to a younger child. Give them the opportunity to do what you are doing, and that means doing good. Okay, they need that same opportunity that you have, is to be an effective, positive force in the world. Metacognitive journaling. I say this because if we just refer back to the slide before of really learning about your emotions, this is something that challenged me. This is how I felt. And they start using more of the language that's in the outer concentric circles. It's really good for them to understand their emotions, but also it's, as a teacher, I'm thinking, they're going to learn more descriptive words. They're going to become better writers. They're going to become better at communication, because they're going to be more succinct in their language. And so not only is this helping them emotionally, it's also helping them academically. So really, metacognitive journaling, you can decide how you want to use it. Something that I got really excited about this week: how did my body feel? What, or something that really upset me, or something that's really challenging me, or something I'm afraid to tell, whatever it is you want to do. But that metacognitive process of understanding their own thinking is so critical. Socratic seminar, is great because you're asking lots of questions. You're delving. There's no like right answer. You're really delving into how they're thinking, what they're responding to. That is also really great academically, by the way, but it's really also good for these kinds of, if you're looking at a storytelling or a scenario, or you're looking at a piece of literature that you think is really good, or something that happened. And then role play, we use this a lot in health education. Practice using the words. So if you're upset, practice using these words. What words could we have used? How do we practice using the word? Or how do we practice calming down? Or how do we practice talking to someone that, we may be nervous about talking to? All of those things are critical for life skills, and they're all included in social emotional learning. So where do we go for guidance? These are the ones that I use a lot, although there are a lot more. The Castle organization, which Jerry talked about, has so many resources. It can be a little overwhelming. They also give you guidance on programs. If you want a prescriptive program that's evidence-based. As far as mentoring goes, I don't recommend an evidence-based program because then you get caught up in the evidence-based program and not on the relationship, which Jerry talked about. I do believe you can have guidance. You can have frameworks for mentoring. And I think William's going to kind of talk about how he sort of organizes things. So it's just not a free for all out there, and you're just, you're out there on your own. You do have guidance and help. Edutopia is somewhere I go all the time. I just type stuff into Edutopia in the search engine. It's founded by George Lucas. They do an incredible job. And what I love about Edutopia is you can use whatever the thing that you're looking at today. You don't have to go through a huge training. You don't have to be a PhD. You can just go to Edutopia and look at some of the strategies they use, and you can try them, because these come from the field. These do not come from big researchers. They come from the field. They're very pragmatic. And the folks that are writing these short articles are telling you how they're doing it and why they're doing it, who they're doing it with, and what the action actually is, what the activity is. Transforming Ed is a little more sophisticated in what they do, although I pull a lot of information out of Transforming Ed about how to integrate social emotional learning into academic performance. Although I think there's probably something that can be mined for mentorship as well out of Transforming Ed. They're out of Boston. They're very, very, very innovative. So if you want to kind of know what's going on in the world of SEL, you've got, you've got a taste of this, and you're like, this is really interesting stuff. So for yourself or your kids or your own children, these three resources, I think, are probably the ones that I go to the most, although Harvard has some. You're not going to lack, there's not going to be a lack of resources for you. There might be too many. So if it's too many, just kind of pare back until you feel comfortable. Also, the other thing is find your experts around you. There will be people around you that really have practiced social emotional learning, probably know it pretty well. Excuse me. So find your experts if you're a little bit lost, and then share your ideas with each other. One of the most successful implementations of social emotional learning in LA Unified was through Beyond the Bell expanded learning. They did an incredible job. And so that kind of a relationship that's not a teacher or it has some kind of, evaluative place in that child's life is so powerful. Your relationship with those students, especially if you're mentoring in middle school, is so critical. So I'm going to stop there. I've kind of given you my most important things, but number one is, of course, your understanding of yourself, modeling the behavior, listening, telling stories, offering them an opportunity to be good, and then knowing where to go for information if you need more information. And you can always email me too, because, I'd be happy to do that. So I'm done.
Thank you, Lori. That was excellent information. And as I see this overall webinar, you've given them a lot of general information, very valuable. And now we're going from the general to the specific. Well, one person who's a program director who's developed a program and curriculum based on SEL. So take it away, William.
All righty. Thank you. Always an honor to be here with you, Minnie, Jerry, Lori. Love you guys. Thank you so much. And then just in case, I have 2 little ones at home and I have 3 dogs. So anything is bound to happen in my home while I'm presenting today. So try to ignore it. Try to tune it out. It's a circus in my house. All right. So Los Angeles Team Mentoring. That's the organization that I work for. Our model, just so you got to kind of, get some framework of how we provide our services. So we are about 3 mentors to 10 to 12 kids. Again, 3 mentors. We try to use a formula of having, someone from the school to build a connection to the school, a college mentor to promote higher learning, and then a community mentor to really, talk about life skills. And then again, our 3 mentors are working with 10 to 12 kids. We traditionally serve about 1,300 kids a year. Yes, 1,300 kids a year. That's actually 1,300 kids weekly. With the support of over 330 mentors across 11 LAUSD schools. That's how I met Dr. Ballant. And then recently, as many of you, I'm sure, had to, take the same approach. You had to pivot, right? We all had to change our approaches and go into a virtual model. And that's what we had to do this year. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And in our virtual model, we serve a little less, right? Because, required a little more supervision and hands-on, work from our staff just to ensure that we're having quality mentoring sessions. And then, overall, what makes us really unique to other mentoring programs, I know there's a lot of folks, which I'm familiar. I saw some very familiar names in the chat. So welcome to some of my colleagues here in Los Angeles. But yes, our approach is different. We're a team approach to mentoring. Others might define it as a group approach to mentoring. But at the end of the day, we really are about delivering social emotional learning. And just like Dr. Volant shared with you guys, though we offer the social emotional learning, we're very careful and strategic in how we deliver our SEL. All right, next slide. All right, so on this slide, this is really the foundation. These are the pillars, not only of our program, but how we train our staff, how we train our mentors, and how we have built our program and curriculum. We use the Circle of Courage. So the Circle of Courage is a model of youth development that's based on the principles of belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity. And again, you heard Lori talk about that, right? Building empathy and building relationships. So I'll elaborate a little bit more in a minute. But typically youth who have their 4 basic needs met are highly motivated, and they go on to graduate from high school and oftentimes meet their life goals. However, youth who do not have those 4 basic needs met, they will either act out or drop out. And some of you may have had this experience already working with your kids. Again, the acting out or the dropping out. The acting out, of course, requires behavior management, while the dropping out requires making an effort to re-engage youth. And after hours and hours of countless research and contemplation, we decided to really adopt the 4 basic needs practice. Again, this is what we adopted because it's really easy to digest. The model originated from child development practices of Native Americans, but also includes a lot of the most recent youth development research. At our organization, we found tremendous success in using this methodology, which has been really helpful in helping us develop our curriculum, as well as hugely helpful in further developing our mentor trainings and workshops, as these constructs have become guiding principles for our mentors and our staff. Again, Lori talked about that. It's really important that your staff is on board as well. So these have become real, good guiding principles for us. So next slide, please. So really quickly, we'll talk about child development basic needs, as I know many of you know this, but we all know that trust is probably the most important part of human development. Trusting relationships, of course, are developed early on with family members. However, in our program, 2/3 of our youth are not living in a traditional home, or they have fewer opportunities to build trusting relationships. In addition, we know our kids have some negative life experiences, such as not living in a safe environment, making it difficult for them to trust others. And this is why this population of youth that we serve feel benefit highly from having trusting relationships, as I'm sure you all will agree. And mentoring, that's the beauty of mentoring. I'm so passionate about mentoring. And mentoring offers an incredible example of what trusting relationships, like Lori said, the role modeling, what trusting relationships can look like. And that's the beauty of mentoring. Jerry and I talk about this all the time. Those of us in the mentoring world, we've been really doing SEL for a long time. We've just been doing it organically and intrinsically. But, we can put some best practices in place to really help develop these skills in our kids. So in addition to the importance of trusting relationships, there are 4 basic needs, and I'm going to describe them. The authors of Reclaiming Youth at Risk, which is a fantastic book, determined that at-risk youth have 4 basic needs that must be met in order to thrive as adults. That is belonging. They need to feel accepted and loved and a part of something, right? And I like to say we all feel that way. We all want to feel accepted. So our program, as I mentioned before, uses the team approach, which allows our youth to feel accepted and a part of a group. So we're building those social skills. This helps increase their positive feelings about school and helps them have more positive peer associations and interactions. So with themselves, peer-to-peer, and peer-to-adult. Then we've got mastery, and that's the need to be good at something and not caught in a cycle of failure. And these skills are reinforced through positive mentor reinforcement. Again, a lot of your programs are probably already doing this. So for example, we had a student once who generally believed they weren't smart. This young man was like, I'm not smart. I'm not smart. Every time we try to call him, he's like, I'm not smart. I'm not smart. Well, here's the beauty of mentoring. Then the mentor came in, and just over time, right? These things take time. The mentor just kept emphasizing, hey, you're a great problem solver. Hey, you're a natural born leader. And just kept telling, wow, that was a great idea. Wow, that was a great strategy. And just really kept reinforcing and giving that reinforcement. That by the end of the program year, this young man started to speak up more and share his ideas with the larger group. So again, a lot of you are probably already doing this in your mentoring program. All right, next slide. Independence, and that's the feeling that you can make your own decisions, right? So belonging, we all want to feel accepted. I'm sure by a show of hands, we all feel that. We talked about mastery. We all want to be good at something. I'm sure at a show of hands, we all feel that way. Independence, we want to feel in control of our lives. So our curriculum, again, which is all aligned with team-based activities, empowers our youth to critically develop their decision-making and problem-solving skills, which immediately begins to help them with both their short-term and their long-term goals. So again, we're very strategic with how we develop our curriculum, making it fun and interactive, right? So it doesn't feel prescriptive, but asking a lot of open-ended questions, fostering that discovery in what we do in our approach and in our model really helps satisfy that need. And then generosity, as Dr. Balan talked about, the need to give to others and not always be a recipient, right? So again, in our curriculum, using team-based approach, we allow our students to get involved in community service projects, such maybe a stock drive for the homeless, a pet food drive, a writing campaign to the armed forces, a beautification project. And these are all things, even in your one-on-one program, that you could do with your mentees that will help fortify, the concepts of relationship building, building empathy, feeling like a contributor, and so on, feeling accepted. So again, each of these projects allow our youth to learn about the needs in their community and the importance of giving others, which really builds that empathy. All right, next slide. All right, so at LATM, we have 6 cycles in our curriculum. And those cycles are 6 sessions each for a total of 36 group sessions. Each session is about an hour and a half, which is not too long and not too short, but it keeps the kids engaged. We also found that when teaching SEL, that structure and routine is extremely important. Again, structure and routine is really important. Like any concept or skill we're trying to learn, students need time and structure in a safe environment to permanently learn these new skills and these attitudes. But it's important to note that we train our mentors and our staff to utilize the curriculum as a springboard for conversation, storytelling, role modeling, asking open-ended questions, and most significantly and importantly, for relationship building. So we don't want them to be task-oriented. Lori covered that, right? And we talked about, we got to be careful about being prescriptive, but how do we create, that atmosphere, that experience that allows for conversation and for us to get to know each other and storytell and give advice or engage in community service projects or activities that's really building those social and emotional learning skills, where we're learning about what motivates our kids, what drives our kids, what are their perceptions, what are their ideas, how do they look at life? And just by doing that, we really are just naturally, again, developing the social emotional learning skills of our kids. All right, next slide, please. So keep in mind that when you're developing your programs or curriculum, to identify the outcomes that you want. And that's really important. And we really had to hone in on this. We had to really decide what are social emotional learning outcomes. At LATM, we hope to improve adult to peer, peer-to-peer, self-efficacy, and resiliency. One of my favorite words, resiliency, and school connectedness. So here's a snapshot of our curriculum. So during year 1 and year 2, it's designed for 6th and 7th graders. Students are seeking to belong, experiencing some extreme emotions, and struggle with making well thought out decisions. And for this reason, we aim to build students' team building and communication, self-efficacy, and conflict resolution skills. And then during year 3, this one is designed for our 8th graders. Students are comparing their identity with others, discovering their strengths and their identities, and becoming more future oriented. And as you can see here, we aim to build life and independent living skills. And so, once again, our curriculum really helps to satisfy the 4 basic needs. And I'll repeat them again. I'm like Laura, I like to repeat things even when I'm in mentor training, just to make sure it sticks. But that's belonging, again, feeling a sense of community, being a part of something, our program, team approach. Mastery, achieving something and being good at it. And then in our program or your programs, having that mentor, really being there, being that cheerleader, and really pointing out and finding that untapped potential that every one of our young people have. Independence, being having a sense of one's own thoughts and ideas and feeling in control. And again, mentors can help with that. And then generosity, contributing to a team or society and feeling a strong sense of self-worth and contribution to the world. So as you see, these 4 constructs really fall nicely into, what Jerry presented and Lori presented. They're easy to digest, easy to understand, and it's a great way to guide your mentors and staff. And again, using terms that are familiar and easy for people to remember. Next slide, please. And so I talked a little bit earlier about our virtual to pivot, which has been really fun and fascinating. I so enjoyed the experience. But for anyone providing services virtually and wanting to develop an e-experience, the need for structure, as I said earlier, routine is even more significant. Before we jumped into our virtual world, we tested out our e-platform and began our pilot last June. We chose to present the same concepts, right? So we have the same goals and objectives as our in-person program, but we quickly learned we had to make some minor tweaks and adjustments. So the first adjustment we made was to use very colorful PowerPoints to really move the mentors through the session and help guide them. Our PowerPoints are vibrant. They include clip art and GIFs and videos to really help the kids, students, to keep them engaged and interested. And so, here's just an example of a question of the day. And so we use the questions to focus on, the main objective, right? Whatever the pertinent topic of is that day, and to stimulate conversation. So I can't emphasize that more, right? Have those conversations. That's what I love about having the structure or the curriculum, right? It's just to really give people a springboard that sometimes may take a little while to have, that type of discussion. But with a framework like this, you can springboard and have these types of discussions. So let me give you another glimpse of our curriculum on the next slide. All right, so here's a lesson that was centered on virtual ethics. And as you can see here, we were able to present our students with 4 questions. And then students created signs, a true and false sign, and then they would hold up their sign, after we asked one of the questions. And then afterwards, again, just like Lori said, presenting those questions, those thought-provoking questions, we asked students to elaborate, to tell us more. And so, as you can probably conclude, this allowed our students, even our shyer students, to participate while also improving students' communication and listening skills, right? And this is also effective in challenging students, to challenge, I should say, their critical thinking and problem-solving skills. How brilliant is that? You don't even have to do anything. You can just offer the simplest open-ended question. And right there, the wheels start turning and you're challenging their critical thinking skills. So at the end of the day, the result of carefully thought out, curriculum that's integrating SEL allows for a safe and positive learning environment. And that's really key, right? You want your kids to feel that it's safe, that they have a trusting relationship with you so that you really can move through developing their social emotional learning skills, right? Until I feel safe, am I going to feel comfortable opening up? And of course, the long-term effects of SEL helps boost students' social and emotional competencies as they progress in life. All right, next slide, please. All right, so here is an example. So we actually, felt it was important that we immediately hired an evaluator to evaluate our program. So this slide is a snapshot of our most recent evaluation by ERC. If anyone's looking for evaluators, are here in California. But ERC provides, high quality client focused evaluation for K through 12 school districts, county offices of education, and institutions of higher learning. They're fantastic. Anyway, we had ERC come in and the evaluation focused on the quality of the e-mentoring experience and the effectiveness of the program in promoting students' knowledge and development of social emotional skills covered in our curriculum. So as you can see in this graph, the results provided confirmation, yay, that mentees had fun. That's important, right? They had fun, but they were learning, right, during their e-mentoring sessions, and they felt cared by their mentors. They learned new things and they connected with their peers. So what a beautiful thing, and we're so proud of these results. So I have one more slide to share with you really quickly. So this graph was a criterion-based survey on personal growth items The results suggested that a majority of the mentees perceive themselves to have developed. That's where self-perception is key when teaching social emotional learning. Self-perception, right? We've got to know, we got to feel that we're learning and grasping and understanding these concepts. So the majority of our mentees perceive to have developed their social emotional learning skills during their mentoring experience. So, at the end of the day, I can go on and on and on. Me and Jerry, we can go on and on. We have great conversation, and Lori too. But so as you can see here, strategically, and I love that word, strategically allowing breath in your curriculum, allowing breath in your mentoring session is so valuable and important. But if you're careful with it and you integrate it strategically into the norms and the culture of everything you do with your staff, it's important your staff are on board, your mentors and your mentees. So if any of you doing any orientations or onboarding with your mentees, we start there with developing their social emotional learning skills. It starts from the moment that your students walk into your programs. And so, as I'm sure you all will agree, social emotional learning is needed now more than ever. So thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Jerry.
Great. Thank you so much. Great example of how a specific program jumps into social emotional learning. Before we go to questions, and our time frame is really good. We finished up a little bit early, so there's going to be plenty of time for questions, and then we have a lot of resources that we could go over too if we still have time. But William, I have a couple questions for you before we open it up to the questions from the participants. One is, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, for a mentor who's going to deliver social and emotional learning, what do you look for in that mentor? I know in talking to you that you want the sort of the quality of the mentor and the energy of the mentor to sort of reach a higher level than it has in the past. Can you talk about that? And then sort of a part two is then, how do you train your mentors on the 4 basic needs?
Very nice. Yes. So I live in Los Angeles. This is the movie industry. So I use some entertainment terms every once in a while. So when we're looking for mentors, I call it the screen tests. And so this is the beauty, some of the silver linings that came out of our pandemic, right? Utilizing Zoom. We were pros and cons, as we all know. But one of the pros is that, we used to telephonically interview and screen our mentors. Well, now with Zoom, we never thought about it, but now we conduct our pre-screening interviews over Zoom. And so while we're doing that, we're really looking for that energy, that enthusiasm, a dynamic personality. And, I've shared with Jerry, we'll always have folks who come to us with great big hearts. And that's great, right? But in the virtual world, we got to kind of like turn up the volume just a little bit and make sure that the heart has volume and speaks for itself, and that you have folks that are really engaging, because it'll be really important when you're facilitating virtually that you have engaging mentors to make sure that we're keeping the kids' attention, right? And we're also looking for folks that make great connections. I love how Lori said that storytell, and they're great storytellers, just like, you might experience when you meet those storytellers in your life, you can kind of sit in front of them for hours and have them tell you stories because they're great storytellers. Well, that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for those dynamic folks who are great storytellers, who we know will even ask really great questions. So that's one thing. And then as far as training our mentors, we do a lot of role playing. Again, we try to make connections with our mentors in the training to make sure that they understand each concept, the need for belonging, and we'll do some role playing exercise. We'll even throw in some behavioral issues or scenarios that connect to each of those principles, so that they have an opportunity to problem solve themselves through each of those constructs. But again, and then we'll do our activities. And then as we're doing the activities, we're always reminding them, okay, what can we be doing here to make the kids feel accepted? What can we be doing here to call out that mastery? What can we do here to maybe throw in some life skill information? So we're really promoting that idea of life skills, right? And independent living. And then what can we do to make sure each kid on the team is contributing as we're doing this activity, right? And giving a voice and giving an opinion or a viewpoint. And then again, just saying, wow, what a great job, what a great idea, how profound, how incredible. So that's really how, we tackle the mentoring piece.
Great. Thank you so much. Minnie, do you want to take over the questions?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, William and Lori. It's been a great session. I'm glad we have some more time too. So I know earlier we had a question actually directed for Lori about finding more comprehensive emotions wheels.
Okay, I just Googled that one. I just went on, I think I found it on Pinterest or something like that. So I would just say a Google search. That's what I do. And I just put, I think I put social emotional, I put the motion learning. They use these wheels in English classes, in literature. That's where they use them a lot to help people have more descriptive words, more adjectives for their writing. And that's where this came from. So I would say that that's probably what you should do. I can do some more Googling and put something, we can send it back to you, but I'm sure that you on your own would find quite a bit. I don't know if I'm answering the question or not, but that's how I found it. And then you have grade levels of doing it, but it's the use of that wheel that's really important. And find the one that works for you, because there are different ones. So hopefully I'm answering the question.
Thanks so much, Lori. And again, the panelists' contact information will be on the slide after this, so you all can also feel free to reach out if we don't get to your question today. So we have a question earlier from Cheryl about, I guess, the best resources to give volunteer mentors ideas so they feel empowered to continue. So Cheryl's program is a school-based one-to-one mentoring program. So do you all have any ideas for that, for volunteer mentors?
William, did you want to jump in with that one?
Well, in our organization, this is how we met Jerry. I've worked with Jerry at 2 different organizations. But, pulling in curriculum consultants is something that we've done. Jerry's a curriculum consultant himself. He's great at developing curriculum. But Jerry's going to share some resources at the end of today's presentation where there's lots of resources there. As you know, Lori shared some resources as well for your school-based programs. That I think there's information there that you guys, as Lori said, you can mine and go through. It's something that we do sometimes as well when we're looking for activities. Like we just recently integrated social justice, and we went out and found some of the same resources that Lori recommended. Also, Common Sense Media is one of my favorite. They've got a lot of material and activities and suggestions on film, television, outings, crafts. I mean, you name it. They have a lot of resources there for your one-on-one programs so that it doesn't feel prescriptive and it feels like you're just doing something really fun or special with your mentees in your program.
That's great. And then also let me jump in. I guess this is a question from Cheryl Freeman. One of the things that you can do is just have a mentor roundtable, and it could be a half hour, an hour. Some of the research that Mentor did over the COVID pandemic, they found that mentors really want to talk with each other. So your question also has to do with support and training and networking. They really enjoy getting into a Zoom meeting and maybe hearing 5 or 10 minutes of something to do with social emotional learning. It could be just what are some conversation openers you can have with your mentees. So it could be something like every time we meet, if you're comfortable, mentee, let's talk about good news, bad news, something good that happened to you since we've seen you or I've seen you, and then something not so good, or weather report. If your emotions were the weather, what is the weather today? And then the mentors also share their weather, how they're feeling without going too deeply. But in a mentor roundtable, I think what mentors really enjoy is both sharing their successes and obstacles. So you can go around and ask folks, what's one success you've had with your match? What's one obstacle? So they get to brag a little bit or feel good. And then also they get to, they get some help with problem solving. Somebody comes up with how they're stuck with their mentee, just kind of like you do in group mentoring with the mentees. has anybody else had this problem? And what did you do? And what suggestions do you have? And that really empowers the mentors and creates a sense of team.
Thank you, William and Jerry. I think I saw another question earlier just regarding mentee onboarding sessions. I know, William, you talked a little bit more about, you talked about mentor onboarding, but how do you kind of onboard mentees?
You know, it's funny, we water down, in a sense, our mentor training, right? Because we want to make sure that our mentees and mentors, as I talked about the structure and routine, that we're all on the same page. So, you know, we try to teach the kids too that this is what you're going to get out of the program. These are the expectations of the program. And then, you know, we also try to make connections while we're doing the orientation. How many of you want to do this? How many think you can benefit from this? And, you know, so we try to tie them in so that they feel that this journey that they're getting ready to go on means something to them, right? And it's something that they want to get out of the program. So we might ask them, hey, are there times sometimes when you might feel a little down? Are there times where things might make you feel anxious or nervous, maybe when you're taking a test? Are there times where maybe you find it difficult with some of your friends, you don't understand their reactions, or maybe you don't understand the viewpoint of your parents? You know, do you want to have a job one day? What does that look like? Do you want to go to college? Do you have a college in mind? And so on. So we try to make those kind of, oh, okay, great. Well, you know, you're going to get a mentor in our program. And these are some of the things the mentors can help you with. And then, you know, we'll do a little role playing. We'll even give them a couple of activities. And then we'll start planting that seed and we'll start asking, oh, so we just did this really cool activity. So tell me, how did that feel? What's the first thought that came to mind when you did this activity? What did you take away? So we start priming them early on for the mentoring experience. So again, it's very similar to our mentor training, except, you know, it's watered down, as I said. We do role playing. We start presenting the open-ended questions. We're trying to make that connection with the kids so that they find value and they're excited about, you know, being a part of the mentoring experience. And I think if you do a good setup with the kids and you prime them really well, then they tend to stick in your programs because now they feel like I have this emotional connection to this. This applies to me. This is something I want to do. I want to work on. And additionally, it's important to have the parents or the guardians of your kids be involved in the process as well. So we invite our parents and guardians to be a part of the orientation and the onboarding. Again, so the parents are very well aware of what their kids are learning in our program. And we hope, we do something called the One Big Thing I Learned, and I didn't talk a lot about this, but the One Big Thing I Learned, we ask that the kids share at the end. We do a reflection. And at the end, we ask the kids, what was the one big thing I learned today? And then they write it down and we say, okay, we want to make sure that you share it with your parents, have your parents sign it or initial it, and you get it back. And we incentivize the return of it because we want our kids to go and speak to their parents, and then we give them a prize. So we are incentivizing kids to share with their parents what they're learning in our program. Oftentimes we get parents say, thank you. You know, I've never would have had this conversation with my kid. I've never even thought about having a conversation like this with my kid. I'm so grateful that you're teaching our kids these concepts. And then we hope too that they are reinforcing it, right? Hey, remember what you learned in the program? You learned about, hey, taking a deep breath, you know, when you get angry and so on. So, you know, I can go on and on, but, you know, that's the gist of it.
Thank you, William. So we have a couple more questions, I think, around just ideas for helping mentors. Again, I think the resources on the next couple slides will also be kind of relevant as well, but ideas to help mentors foster emotional learning with youth who have a significant history of trauma, so maybe hesitant to disclose to their mentor, as well as recommendations for helping mentors navigate and initiate difficult conversations with young people, especially when the perspectives might not align with the mentors and as well as the program staff and trainers.
I'll take this one a little bit and then I'll let William finish up. But the thing about working with kids with trauma is it's good to understand what trauma is and what it looks like and how it affects. That's some research that you can do, or you can ask the program you work with to give you information on that. What I highly recommend and I highly caution you about is not becoming the therapist that I think Jerry talked about. As a teacher, I was highly trained. I have a 2 masters and a doctorate, and I've been around this world a long time, but I am not qualified at all to give advice to a kid that's suicidal, or to a kid that has, really severe issues around certain things. I was a mandated reporter, and I always started with, I'm a mandated reporter. These are the things I must report. If you tell me these things, that means I have to do something about it. Now, if you're dealing drugs, I have to report it. If you're doing drugs, unless you're a threat to yourself, I don't have to report it. I mean, I would be really specific and very clear, because that trust relationship is really, really important. We are not therapists. We are not mental health professionals, especially even if you are in this setting, it's not the setting to do that. It's finding the right resources. And that's the other thing that William probably can talk to, is making sure that the mentors understand the resources available to them in the school and in the community. That's so, so critical. It's so, so critical. So I'm not sure if I'm actually answering the question, Minnie, but it's really important to understand your role in the relationship, your responsibility to that child to be very honest, and you need to ask for help when the situation calls for it. But I highly recommend that folks understand what trauma is, what it looks like, and how it manifests in behavior with kids, and some of the short and long-term effects of it all. So that's something that we can't do today, but definitely should be addressed.
And
I echo Lori. Lori, you hit it all on the nail on the head. That's exactly how we train our mentors and staff, right? And I love that someone in the chat put resource brokers. That's exactly correct. We try to make sure we're all resource brokers. Because we're school-based, we have the opportunity of tapping into some of the resources that exist at the school. But we're very careful, just like Lori said, we say mandated reporters. We even say that in our, as someone was asking, our student orientation, hey, if we feel like you're going to bring harm to yourself or harm to others, it's our responsibility to make sure that we keep you safe because we care. We tell the mentors as well, if there's ever a time that we miss something and you hear something or there's a trigger, we're all mandated reporters and we've got to jump in and we got to do what we need to do. But we step away from that as well, and we look for resources for the kids.
those are great responses from you both. And I'll add, and I'm looking at the question again, are there any ideas to help mentors foster emotional learning with youth who may have had significant history of trauma that may be more hesitant to disclose to their mentor? One is that the mentor's job, as Lori said, is not to, in my paraphrasing, be Sherlock Holmes, to dig deep, but just teach your mentors to empathize, and to something that Lori and I and William talked about in a recent call, to respond and not react when you hear these stories. So when you hear the stories, just don't sort of, just explode with emotion. But so I had a tool that a psychologist taught me when I was in an internship, just to empathize and just say, oh, it sounds like you're having a tough time. And again, as Lori and William said, you're not the therapist, the mentor's not the therapist. Just know when to get help. Teach your mentors for anything that they're uncomfortable with, or anything that seems powerfully, as far as emotion or trauma, to connect with program staff so they can find resources. Any more questions?
Yeah, and I think this also, again, was along the same lines of the earlier question I asked, just any other recommendations about helping mentors navigate and initiate conversations with students about contentious but important topics. Can be difficult when mentor perspectives don't align with those of our program staff or trainers.
Yeah, if anybody knows the answer to that, contact me, because it's even hard to talk to your friends about some of these issues when you have disagreements. Lori or William, any thoughts about that?
I think that because I taught health education in high school, and there were a lot of opinions about a lot of things in the classroom. I listen for understanding. I don't really try to give my point of view because that's not what I'm there for. you have to be non-judgmental. I mean, it's not about you. Like I said, it's not about you, but it begins with you and your ability to model behavior of accepting and listening to people. Unless they are going to do something dangerous, you're there to listen. And I'm not really sure what it would be. Maybe if kid tells you he's gone to the store and he's stealing something or something like that. Anything around sexuality, sex, obviously you don't respond to. That's, sexual identity, because that's what they're going through. You just listen, you listen. If your religious belief is totally in opposition to what a kid is telling you, that's not your place to say anything to them. It's not. That's, your church, is your business. Their spiritual development is, what I'm saying? You have to be really non-judgmental and listen openly. And again, unless they're in trouble, and they're going to be in trouble, like serious trouble, that's not your job to be a moral compass for them.
I agree with both Jerry and Lori. They're absolutely right. You got to be non-judgmental, open-minded, and again, just try to, whenever possible, ask the right kind of questions. But I agree.
Lori and William, thank you so much. I know there were still questions we weren't able to get to, but hopefully, again, I'm going to pass it back to Jerry to share some resources along with, as you can see, the contact of our panelists on the slide here.
Great, and there's our contacts, so please feel free to contact us. If you're contacting me, please put the word mentor or mentoring in the subject line, because a lot of mine goes to spam. And I saw one question that says, what are some activities you can do for social emotional learning for a group? And so we're gonna, the resources, I think, will focus on that. The first, it's a huge document put out by Mentor on Social Emotional Development Early Adolescence. It's really helpful, not so much for curriculum, but just an overview of the field. It's about 60 pages, I think. Let's see, Reclaiming Youth at Risk is the book where William pulled the Circle of Courage and the 4 basic needs out of. The next 3 to 4 websites are ones that Lori recommends. The Edutopia, Transforming Education, Committee for Children. If we go to the slide that has Project Arrive on top. Oh, and I also wanted to if you go back one, the 40 developmental assets, some people use the 40 developmental assets to create their curriculum. If you go to, and it's actually a link on one of the next slides, a 2019 webinar by Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series on social emotional learning. One of the programs described how they developed their curriculum from the 40 developmental assets. So Project Arrive at the top of your screen now, San Francisco Unified School District, they are one of the best mentoring programs around. They've had a lot of research done on them. They have a wonderful website. So if you click on this, you can go to the activities and the curriculum. They focus on a 6th grade population, I believe, and a 9th grade population. The 9th grade population is transitioning to high school, so all their activities are about transitioning, and they have some of their curriculum online. It's a really great resource. And then there's CASEL, and then the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and so on and so forth. William mentioned yesterday on a conference call that Common Sense Media has a lot of materials. What kinds of materials do they have?
They have everything. They have videos you can use, examples of activities. Again, as I said, outings you can do with your kids. I mean, they have, Lori's familiar with it. I mean, just a library. I love it. Even if you're a parent, go to Common Sense Media. They have great stuff for parents too. Great resource.
Thank you. And then the next page, please. Next slide. And then how do you assess programs? There's a CASEL assessment guide. Paramount has information about assessment. The National Mentoring Resource Center has a measurement guidance toolkit for mentoring programs. And as you look at the areas, these are some of the areas of social and emotional learning that you can do pre and post test with your mentees. So a lot of resources for you all. And I just want to thank Lori and William for your expertise, your lives until this point, for working with children and all that you have done and do for young people. And thanks for being on fire. It's really good to have presenters who are on fire about the topic.
Yes, thank you so much, Jerry, Lori, and William. And again, the slides will be shared out to you all in a follow-up email in about, I believe, on Monday or Tuesday. And lastly, again, we always want to direct folks to some of our resources here at Mentor National. We obviously support a national network of affiliates. We encourage you all to see if you have one in your area and reach out to them as well. Feel free to also list your program with the Mentoring Connector. That's one way to recruit volunteers and mentors. And lastly, we have the Mentors OJJDP National Mentoring Resource Center to access lots of different mentoring resources, as well as no-cost training and technical assistance. Again, after the webinar, please help us out by answering the survey. That will also help inform future webinars. And again, you will receive an email with how to download the slides, the recording, and this list of resources. That's been really great. Again, feel free to email us again and stay connected. Thank you all so much for being here today. And please join us next month for our next webinar on mentoring girls and young women on June 17th. I hope you all have a wonderful day.